By the way, this is a button-up shirt. So yeah. All right, we'll start in three, two, and one, and go. So ever since I was a little kid, I always loved to play with football in my front yard, and I'd play almost every single day with my friends. And one of my favorite things that we used to do was we would imitate the players that we loved to watch on TV. And one of the players that I loved to imitate the most was actually Barry Bonds, who was someone that I never really got to see play live, but watching highlights, I just fell in love with him. And one of my favorite things about him was he was a left-handed hitter, which I'm personally not, and he would do this bat waggle. I just love to do it and hit against my friends with it. And one day my dad comes up when I was doing this Barry Bonds batting stance and he goes, Ryan, what player are you trying to imitate? And I go, Dad, I'm trying to do Barry Bonds. And my dad, who had grown up watching Barry Bonds, says, I love Barry Bonds. It just sucks that he took steroids. And I go, steroids? Well, he's still like one of the best players ever. He's still in the Hall of Fame, right? And my dad goes, he's not in the Hall of Fame. And ever since I heard my dad say that, I always wondered. I said, why is Barry Bonds not in the Hall of Fame? Sure, people think that he took steroids, but is that really that important? Is that such a bad thing? So today I would like to talk to you guys about why Barry Bonds should actually be in the Hall of Fame. Because one, he was never proven to actually have taken steroids. He's one of the greatest baseball players to have ever lived, and his career was super historic, and it deserves to be a part of the Baseball Hall of Fame museum. Firstly, I want to talk about how it was never proven that Barry Bonds actually took steroids. And in Major League Baseball and in all athletic competitive environments, steroids is actually considered cheating and is actually a massive, terrible thing to do, and it will get you suspended for maybe a full season. And the first evidence I want to use is actually against my argument, and it's from Tim Garrity from Bleacher Report, and he says, quote, the evidence indicates that not only was Barry Bonds using steroids, he was also actively involved in how it was being administered and administrated. I apologize. And how to rebuttal against that is actually a quote by David Cucciari from Bleacher Report, who says, we're living in a world where you have to be where we're innocent until proven guilty. And hypothetically, if Major League Baseball started to ban players for using PEDs, it would be very difficult for them to lay the hammer down on Barry Bonds. And my quote is a perfect rebuttal because it basically says that Major League Baseball has no evidence against Barry Bonds, who against him and using steroids, because he was never tested positive for using steroids, meaning that they can't use this against him. And this takes me to some of the debates that I've had with my friends, as well as many other people have had about the Barry Bonds Hall of Fame situation. And we all talk about how did he take steroids? Did he not? He was never proven. And the conversation, my point that I would bring up is the golden rule of debating is you can't bring up something that never happened. You can't use that as a point. So that would just be totally unfair to use against Barry Bonds. And that's going to lead me to, in addition to never being positive for testing for steroids, Barry Bonds is just one of the greatest to ever play the sport of baseball. And so, secondly, I would like to talk to you about how Barry Bonds is one of the greatest athletes from baseball to have ever lived. And Mr. Wells from andescape.com mentions that if you were to ask me who I thought was one of the best or who were the best baseball players of all time, besides pitchers, and I didn't say either Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Willie Mays, or Barry Bonds, I would be lying. And this pretty much just shows you that Babe Ruth is up there in at least the top 10 to top 5 probably greatest baseball players ever. And I have personally actually had conversations with former Major League Baseball player Terry Whitfield, who happened to have played in between the time periods of Barry Bonds in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and Willie Mays back in the 60s. So he was somewhere in the 70s or 80s, Terry Whitfield was. And he's always told me that, he's had a super difficult time trying to figure out who he really believes to be better. And Willie Mays is one of the most celebrated baseball players of all time. So that just basically shows you that Barry Bonds should be celebrated on that same level based on his skill set and his play. because Barry Bonds was one of the best ever. He put up the most home runs ever, uh, most walks ever, most intentional walks, meaning that opposing pitchers were scared of him more than any other batter ever. And while Barry Bonds was one of the greatest players to ever exist, his story needs to be shared no matter whether it's controversial or not. So finally, the Baseball Hall of Fame is a historic museum. And what Barry Bonds did in his career was as historic as it gets. And this needs to be shared because history in baseball is super important. And without it, the game doesn't hold as much value. And Barry Bonds brings so much of that value. So, I mean, this historic museum is somewhere where Barry Bonds needs to be shared. And according to Adam Capel from Complex Sports, he quotes that the Baseball Hall of Fame is, quote unquote, it is a museum. And basically, he's saying that with the controversy behind Barry Bonds, whether or not you believe he should be a Hall of Famer, whether he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer, he deserves to be shared within the museum because he's a part of history. He's a part of the game. He's the part of the game that we love. Uh, he's a part of one of the most important baseball eras there ever was. And they actually do call it the steroid era because there were so many players that were actually guilty of using steroids, such as Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. But these players brought so much value to the table. And while those two and many others were not the same caliber of players, Barry Bonds, they still deserve some recognition for bringing that excitement back to baseball. And they're just super important stepping stones to the game that we have today. And not sharing that would just not be sharing a part of the game that has been built up from years and years and years and years. So, and there's so many other examples, and I want to talk to you guys about the time that I actually got to visit the baseball museum myself over in Cooperstown, New York. And it's an amazing exhibit. There's so many amazing there's player plaques and there's so many statues and all these sorts of things that show off all these great players, the Derek Jeters, the Ken Griffey's, the Babe Ruths, all these top players ever. But I was walking through there and I just couldn't help but notice Barry Bonds not mentioned. Pete Rose, the player with the most hits ever, not mentioned. Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the best players in the early 1900s, not mentioned because he was part of a cheating scandal as well. And we're holding these players accountable for things that they did that were incorrect. Yes, very, very much so. Okay. But at the same time, Barry Bonds, what he did was never proven to be wrong. So why are we holding him accountable for something that he truly never did? So today, I talked about why Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame. He never got proven guilty of taking steroids. He was a top player of our game for over 2 decades. And he created so much history in the game that he should be remembered and talked about. And if I'm going to leave you with something today, I'm going to leave you with, I always want you to stick up for yourself, whether other people don't believe you or believe in what you're saying, no matter what, because if you know it's the truth, then what other people think shouldn't matter. And while there was so much controversy surrounding Barry Bonds' career in his lifetime, the day that he becomes a Hall of Famer, if he does, it will be an awesome day for me. And thank you guys so much. Yes.